Guys, what's up? So I've been thinking the last couple days a good way to cover some lack of information that's in my written guide on Fluid Druid, and I see a lot of questions from people on a regular basis, things that aren't that easy to explain in text or are just easier to explain in video format. So I figured I'd do a couple videos in a series, go over some simple things that are covered in the guide in video form for those that are interested, and then go over some rotational things in video format so people can see like what the way to go about things is, and I can talk about some intricacies. So this first video is going to be basically when to use which talents, glyphs, and stat priorities, all that basic stuff that everyone who picks up a spec wants to know, so that they can just watch that video and they'll know it all. If you have any questions or want any more complete information on when to use what talents, like how exactly they stack up, how if I want to use this suboptimal talent in this situation, how much of my damage am I losing, you can find all that information in the guide. The link to that will be below in the description, so you can check that out. And if you have any other questions, definitely check out the guide first. There's lots of information, and a lot of common questions I see are actually answered in the guide if you just take the time to look for the section that's relevant. So definitely check that out. Alright, so let's jump right into the talents then. So this is my normal breakdown that I like to run. I'll go over tier by tier, starting with the non-damagey talents and what they're useful for. So in the first tier, you basically have Displacer Beast and Wild Charge. Wild Charge is my go-to. I just prefer it. A lot of people prefer other things. Some people prefer to just stick with Feline Swiftness or Displacer Beast as their default pick. But you definitely want to be switching this talent on a fight-for-fight basis. It's pretty important. Wild Charge I like a lot because I can charge more frequently. That's its main strength. If you need to go around places frequently, then you probably want Wild Charge. Displacer Beast has a bit longer of a distance thanks to its run speed bonus. You can travel long distances faster than you can with Wild Charge, but it's got a long cooldown. And the other key strength to Displacer Beast is that you can blink over things. You can teleport through things instead of flying through them. So something like the flames on Twin Ogron, or the Crystalline Barrage on Tectis, or the Halo thing on Margok, you can blink through it instead of flying through it. If you fly through it, you're still going to take damage. So that's Displacer Beast is actually a really strong talent in Highmaul. I use it on I don't use it on Tectis because you don't really need to go over the lines, but it's really great on Twins and on Margok and even on some other fights. Feline Swiftness is kind of the go-to if you're just like, well, I'm never going to use any of the other two talents ever. So like something like Tectis, where you're like, well, I don't really ever need to charge the mobs because I'm just following them around the whole time, and I don't ever need to blink anywhere because I'm just following the mobs around the whole time. Might as well just take Feline Swiftness. That's what it's there for. Usually it doesn't find any use other than that, pretty much. Second talent tier, all these aren't bad, I guess. I usually just take Ysera's Gift all the time for PvE, for raiding, because I don't need these other two tools to stay alive. Like, just between Rejuvenation and Healing Touch, I have enough survivability, self-healing from that to feel comfortable. So I don't feel like I ever need these extra cooldowns. So I just take Ysera's Gift so I don't have to worry about it. If you feel like using one of the other two talents, go for it, I guess, but it's definitely not what I would do. So 45 tier and the 75 tier as well, these kind of fall in the same boat. So I'd stick with Typhoon and Ursul's Vortex pretty much all the time. The issue with the other four talents is that they're not bad. There's certainly uses for them if you look hard enough. But the problem is, especially if you're in a 20-man Mythic raid or like a 25-man Heroic raid or something, if you need to stun something, or you need to root something, or you need to snare something, there's almost definitely somebody else in the raid that can do it better than you can do it with these talents. So they should be doing it and not you, and that's why I like to stick with these two talents, because these are useful in more situations, and they have more unique applications, things that other classes can't do. Like Ursul's Vortex is a very unique skill, and short of Gorfrin's Grasp, which is just available to one class, it does something that almost nobody else can provide. 90 tier, Dream of Cenarius is my go-to. I'm going to be healing myself with rejuves and with healing touches when I'm in the fight, in my free GCDs, or if I'm using blood talons. So might as well just cast them on the tank or somebody else instead, get double the bang for my buck, and do a little bit more healing, help out the healers a little bit. Nature's Vigil, you can take it, but it really does not heal very much at all. Like, if you use it during your cooldowns, it's going to heal for a couple 100,000 healing, and it's going to go to random people that may or may not even need it. And if you don't use it during cooldowns, it's just not going to do anything at all. Heart of the Wild is not useless, it's situational. One thing that's really awesome with Heart of the Wild is that you can use it in a phase where your healers, your healers are really going to be struggling to keep up with the damage. You can take Heart of the Wild, use it, and then in your free GCDs, just roll rejuves on everybody you possibly can. And you can actually do quite a lot of healing with this. I did this in the second intermission phase of Margok, and I think I peaked at like 40,000 HPS, so you can pull some pretty serious healing. It's not like healer level healing with their cooldowns up, but it's like an extra, healer and a half or something of just normal throughput. So it's pretty significant. If you have like a bottleneck in a fight, this is definitely something to consider. Obviously, it does have a 6-minute cooldown, so you can probably only do this once a fight. That's the big drawback to this talent. As far as the tanking and casting spells things, you probably won't ever use that. If you have Heart of the Wild, you can, the tank goes down and you really need someone to tank something. Yeah, if you've got Heart of the Wild, you can go into bear form, pop it, and you're probably the best person to try to hold that while the tank gets rezzed or something. But it doesn't make you a tank. You're still probably going to get slaughtered. You might be able to live for a couple seconds or maybe a little longer, but it's going to hurt. So just be aware of that. Alright, so then we get to our damage tiers, 60 and 100. In the 60 tier, basically, there's no reason to ever take anything but Incarnation. Force of Nature is just really fucking bad, and you don't want to take it. It just doesn't do like any damage at all, and it's really annoying to use, at least in my opinion. If you like it, great, but it still does shitty damage. Soul of Forest, it does a little bit better. It does better than Force of Nature pretty much everywhere. It doesn't do quite as good as Incarnation. Incarnation does the most damage in pretty much every circumstance. Soul of Force is a good passive option, but the fact that your active option, you just push it once every 3 minutes with your Berserk, it's so easy, there's really no reason not to use it. There are some quirks with how you use Incarnation, like you want to change what you're doing a little bit, and I'll go over that in the rotation section as far as how to get the most out of Incarnation. But like I said, you basically just use it with Berserk. 100 talents is a little bit more complicated. It's not just you take blood talents all the time like it is in the 60 tier. If you're new to the spec, I would definitely recommend Claws of Shrivala. Claws of Shrivala is a really great learning talent if you don't want to have to manage another extra thing while you're trying to learn how to keep your bleeds up and keep your Savage Roar up. So if that's something that's interesting to you, then definitely go for it. The other two options are a little more complicated. Lunar Inspiration adds another dot to the rotation. It's a cheap dot, only costs 30 energy, and it works a lot like Rake. Basically, it's a ranged magic damage Rake. That's pretty much all there is to it. The problem with Lunar Inspiration is that you only have so much energy, and up to a certain number of targets, you can roll Rake and Moonfire on the targets, like 2 targets. You can do it. It's not easy, but you can definitely do it. But when you get to like 3, 4, the Lunar Inspiration's alright, but once you get to like 5, it's like there's no reason you'd ever take this talent, because you're not going to have the energy or the GCDs to keep this rolling on all the other targets along with Rake. Like, Rake is just as good, if not better, depending on your Mastery or Haste. So that's your priority. Then when there's so many targets, you don't have the time to apply this. So Lunar Inspiration is really good on that 2 to 3 target butter zone. It's not as good as Blood Talons on single target, but it is a fair bit better than Claws of Shrivala. So if that's your thing, go for it. But the real winner in this tier is Blood Talons. Blood Talons is a little complicated. People like to make it out for more complicated than it really is, but it does take some thinking in terms of how to use it. Basically, whenever you complete a finisher, you get a Predatory Swiftness proc. That's right here. 20% chance per combo point you spend. You're usually going to spend 5 combo points on a finisher, so you're usually going to have a 100% chance. And that lets you cast an in-form instant healing touch. and that's what you're going to use to fuel Blood Talons. And then that causes your next two melee abilities, the whole ability, not just like the instant part, to deal 30%. So if you have a bleed, it's going to make the bleed do 30% over its whole duration, and that's what makes it really good. It has a strong synergy with Mastery, obviously, because you're going to be trying to get it on your bleeds because they do so much damage per cast, and it makes Mastery a lot better. This is generally going to be your go-to talent on single target, on like 4+ targets, and on any fight where there's like just a bunch of random numbers of targets. Like if you're doing maybe Bracken Spore is not the best example, but if you're doing Bracken Spore and you've got one boss and it's single target part of the fight, and then sometimes there's 2 targets and sometimes there's other targets you can rake onto or whatever, you probably want to go Blood Talons there because you're just not going to have the time to apply Lunar Inspiration to all the targets, and it loses a lot of effectiveness. Especially if you have like a wave of ads that comes out and you want to burst onto them, you're not going to get anywhere with Lunar Inspiration because you don't have the time to apply Rake to everything and then apply Moonfire to everything. And even if you do, by the time you get Moonfire on everything, it's going to be almost dead and it's not going to do any damage. So Blood Talons is really good pretty much across the board, except for in those like 2 to 3 target sustained cleave situations where Lunar Inspiration really dominates. So I'll go over how to use Blood Talons a little bit more in the rotation section, but that's it for talents for now. So next up is Glyphs. So Glyphs are pretty simple. I'll try to keep this short because it's really not that complicated. Basically, you're going to have 2 slots that you're always going to have one of 2 Glyphs in. So in this first slot, you want to either have Cat Form or 9th Life. Cat Form and 9th Life are both really strong Glyphs. They increase your survivability a pretty fair bit. I like Cat Form. Cat Form gives you 20% increased healing done to yourself. And 9th Life, which I don't have and probably tells you something about how good it is 10% damage taken to yourself. So I wouldn't say it's without its use, but in general, 9th Life is going to be good if you feel like you're getting bursted down before you can get heals. And that's not something that really happens that often, even in Mythic rating content. If you're getting bursted down before you get heals, you probably fucked something up and killed yourself to a mechanic. It's probably not because it's just the way the encounter works. You have a lot of self-healing that allows you to sustain through things that most other DPS really just have to pray that their healers keep them up through. So even if there's heavy like raid damage, you can take advantage of Glyph of Cat Form to boost your self-heals and boost the healer's heals to keep you up through that damage instead of relying on the damage reduction from 9th Life. So they're both good glyphs. You can try either one. I really prefer Cat Form though, so I'd definitely go with that as the default. Second glyph slot, you're going to either have Savage Roar or Savagery. They're exclusive with each other, of course. Savage Roar is a really awesome glyph that allows you to get 5 combo point Savage Roar every time you cast a generator out of Stealth, Rake or Shred. So you're always going to open with a Rake or Shred out of Stealth. Even in a 5-man dungeon, what you're going to try to do is you're going to try to get Stealth between every pack and open with a Rake or Shred so that you can have that 5 combo point Savage Roar every time. It's really helpful. And this has a really, really strong synergy with Incarnation. It's part of the reason why Incarnation is so dominant in this tier. Because for the whole Incarnation, every time you Rake or Shred, you get a 5 combo point Savage Roar. And that 5 combo point Savage Roar will go up to like 54 seconds when you refresh it repeatedly like that. So basically what that means is you have that 30 seconds of Savage Roar free, plus the extra 54 seconds of Savage Roar that rolls over after the Incarnation ends, which basically means you don't need to worry about Savage Roar for like 40% of the entire fight. It's really amazing. It's an awesome glyph with Incarnation, even without the other two talents. Like if you were to be using one of these 2 talents because they nerf Incarnation or they buff one of these or something, it's still a really good glyph. Just not quite as good, not quite as ridiculous. Savagery is the alternative. There is one situation where you'd want to use this in terms of like maximizing your damage, and other than that, I really can't recommend you use it ever. Basically, when you want to use Savagery is since it reduces your Savage Roar from 40% to 30%, when you're going to get the most bang for your buck out of Savagery is when you have many targets that you can apply rips to all the targets. Like if you have so much long-lived targets that all your combo points can go straight into a rip on a new target every time, that's when savagery is going to be really good. Unfortunately, this is not something that really hardly ever happens, so that's why you don't really ever use savagery. And you might be like, oh, well, savagery passive, that sounds cool. That sounds like it'd make the spec easier. You lose some damage, and it does make the spec easier, but I cannot recommend it to beginners because the problem is, if you take this glyph, you're not going to be learning how to keep Savage Roar up. And so if you have any interest in not using this glyph in the future, then you shouldn't ever use this glyph because it's not going to teach you how to do that. It's going to be, you're going to have the easiest time in the world just keeping rip up on one target, and then you take out the glyph, you're like, okay, I'm ready to step it up a little bit, try something a little harder, and you're going to be like, okay, this is way different. Now I have to keep up 2 buffs that cost combo points. This is so much harder. It's crazy. I would not recommend trying that. If you just want to have Savage Roar passive all the time forever, by all means go for it, but you are going to be doing a little less damage. It's not a ton less, just a little less. So that's basically it for the 2 mandatory glyphs. For the 3rd slot, this is your slot where you can swap things around just depending on the encounter. So really good options for this are obviously Stampeding Roar, which increases the range to 40 yards, which is awesome. Basically means it's always going to hit your whole raid. And in cases where you want to have like coordinated Stampeding Roars to work against an encounter mechanic, that's going to often be very important, unless you want to just hit the melee, and then obviously you don't need the glyph. Some other useful glyphs are Dash. Dash is kind of like the, I don't know what to put in the slot, so I'm putting Dash in if you need to dash a lot. Rebirth is good. It lets you res people with full health, but the problem is that all the druid specs except for Guardian and Feral, so just Resto and Balance. Resto and Balance have a perk that lets them res instantly, so they lose almost no damage. Like Balance loses almost no damage for resing people. Resto can just res people willy-nilly, and because of the new battle res system, you can res people as many times as you want in a fight, as long as you've got reses left. One person can res every time. So if you've got a Resto or Balance druid that can use this glyph, they're probably better off doing all the reses for you, and you can just keep tunneling the boss or whatever. So that's why this glyph is good, but it's something you have to consider. Another potential useful glyph, Survival Instincts. If you need to mitigate like point damage, like if something hits really hard once and you know it's coming, you can use this and you'll get more Survival Instincts in the fight, but that's not really something that's present in the current content. And the rest of the glyphs are kind of just useless. Maybe I missed 1 or 2, but yeah, that's pretty much it. This one heals you a little bit, but it's kind of mediocre. So that's pretty much it for glyphs. So I'm going to jump into stat priority. So Feral stat priority is a little dynamic. It changes depending on what sort of encounter you're facing. So the key thing, if you really want to maximize, is you want to have the right pieces for all the situations. And obviously you need to be wise about how you acquire these pieces, because you don't want to just take gear from people that could use it better than you. But if you can get pieces for all the situations, then you can swap them based on if I'm doing single target or if I'm doing AoE or what have you. So essentially what you're going to be looking for is, for single target, your stat priority is going to be crit, multi-strike. Those are your 2 best stats for single target. And then versatility and mastery are your 3rd and 4th. With Blood Talons, if you've got good bleed up time and you have Blood Talons and you're using it correctly, then mastery is going to be about the same as versatility. But if you don't, if your bleed up times are not that great, if you're using one of the different talents, then generally versatility is going to be better on single target. And then your 5th stat is haste. Haste is your universally worst stat. There is no situation where it's really that good, so generally you should try to avoid it. I mean, I've got plenty of gear that has haste on it. Haste, 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 haste. Lots of haste gear. That's not ideal, but if it's an item level upgrade, you're still probably going to be very interested in getting that piece, because the agility and just the amount of stats going up from the higher item level is what you want. Ideally, you wouldn't have 906 haste rating like me, because that's way more than you'd really... Like, ideally, you want, like, pretty much none, but that's not ever going to happen unless you're in full best in slot or whatever. So, that's just how it is. The key thing with stat priority is that mastery's value shifts a lot depending on how many targets you can put bleeds onto and your uptime on those targets. Like, if I can't shred the targets a lot because I'm running around in circles for some reason, then the other stats are going to go down, but mastery is still going to be there because you can still get pretty good bleed up time and have that rolling around while you're doing crazy raid mechanic things. So as soon as you add in like a second target or a third target or fourth target, or you're just AoEing stuff, or there's one target and you have to like run across the room and back occasionally because the boss is a dick, then mastery is going to get a lot better. And typically in those situations, mastery is going to be your best stat, even over crit. So it's going to look like mastery, crit, multi-strike, versatility, haste, in that order. So part of gearing as a Feral Druid is going to come down to, you have to decide what the best balance is for each situation. So basically what I would recommend to any Feral Druid is, if you want a balanced gear set, you're going to want crit and mastery as much as possible. Mastery is not the best, it's not the second best single target stat. I mean, I said that earlier, it's the third or fourth, but it's not so far behind multi-strike that you're going to be sacrificing tons of damage. You're going to be sacrificing a little tiny bit of damage, and it's going to make you way better in multi-target situations. And let's be real here, most raid encounters are going to be 2 targets or 3 targets. You're not going to be fighting 1 target for the entire fucking encounter. That's not how it works. There are some encounters like that, and that's the kind of encounter where you want to use the right gear for the right situation, which means stacking crit and multi-strike. But in most cases, you're going to want crit and mastery. If you're going into just like an encounter that's just a giant AoE fest for some reason, then you can consider stacking mastery over crit. And that's when you're going to consider doing something other than just putting crit on all of your enchants. So you can see here I've got crit on my rings, crit enchant on my weapon, crit on my cloak, crit on my neck. That's generally what you're going to want, because crit is generally your best stat. It's not the best in AoE, like I said, but even in an AoE encounter, you're often going to have a situation where you really want to burn a single target. Like if you're doing Margok, where there is frequently multiple targets you can hit, or at the end there's tons of adds that you can thrash onto. But really, it comes down to, there's parts in the fight where you want to burn the Reaver, you want to burn the boss at the end when you're getting close to killing him. So your single target damage does matter. You do not want to sacrifice crit just for the sake of doing the most AoE damage on tons of things that don't really need to die instantly. So crit and mastery, that's the takeaway here. If there's nothing else you learn from this guide, it's crit and mastery. Because if someone's like, I want crit and multi-strike, then I die a little inside every time someone says that. So that's basically stats. One last thing to mention is, like I said, mastery does pull ahead in some situations. If you know what situation you're going into, you can, in theory, put mastery enchants on all your gear, on your weapon, and mastery gems and whatever. You can do that. It's probably going to cost you a lot, but it will perform better if you're doing like an AoE fight. But usually that's not the case, and usually you're not care so much about pressing on one encounter that you want to spend a ton of gold to do that. So that option is there, but it's probably not something that's going to become prominent until like progression in next tier, when the mats have come down in price a fair bit. So that's basically everything as far as stat priority and talents and glyphs go. Like I said, if you want any more info on how exactly the stats match up, I've got DPS comparisons from SimCraft in the guide. Just check out the link below. And the next video is going to be on basic rotation stuff, like how to do the rotation, and maybe some basic issues people have, some definition of some of the mechanics, because not everything is immediately obvious if you just like open up your skill book and look at the core abilities. This doesn't explain shit. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.